happy to have another friend of mine, Stephen Cody. Stephen is Director of Threat Research at Alert Logic, where he authors their pretty renowned cloud security report, as well as heading up their security research team. Stephen spends a lot of time on research and a lot of time evangelizing and advocating for better security worldwide. So Stephen, Tim, James, thank you very much for joining us today. And we're going to be turning things over to them. But before we do, we did have a few questions, a few poll questions that we were going to ask our audience to give us an idea of where you guys are. And the first question is, do you use a software development lifecycle? And if you wouldn't mind just pressing one of these right now, yes, or not right now, or planning to use it in the future. And if that works, okay. And you can see here that our answers were 64% of you absolutely are. So almost 2/3 of the audience uses a software development lifecycle. Question number 2 is, and this is really the money question, is security part of your software development lifecycle? Yes, no, or planning to in the future. And I'm happy to see that 71% is. I wonder if that's because we're drawing from a security crowd or not. But in any event, all good. Question number 3 is, how many of you are familiar with or are even currently using ChatOps? ChatOps. And if you can answer your question on that. Whoop, I think I closed that a little too quickly. I apologize. So it looks like not a lot of people yet are using ChatOps, or just not a lot of people voted. And then finally, with recent DDoS attacks affecting several well-known brands, have you implemented some sort of DDoS protection or DDoS strategy to help ensure your network performance? So, and again, it looks like, a little less than half of you, well, only about 1/3 of you have, 40% have not, and 25 or 24% are planning to do so in the future. And that's probably about what we see, I think, in the world at large, and probably Tim will talk more about that. Okay, without further ado then, let us move into some of our presentation here today. And I think we're going to start off with James Brown of JumpCloud. And James, if you can take it away.
Okay, hi there. This is James Brown, formerly Chief Experience Officer at JumpCloud. I'm currently Chief Architect. Thank you, first of all, to Alan, DevOps.com, and to Incapsula for funding this. My thoughts today around DevOps and ChatOps really focus around collaboration and being quicker at responding to attacks in process, and also automating the response to those attacks and being able to take advantage of that automation very quickly and very easily. So let me introduce ChatOps for those of you who haven't heard of it. So a lot of you are probably familiar with Slack or HipChat or any number of different chat services that have an integrated bot, something that you can control as you chat, right in line with what you're doing. ChatOps is essentially taking that collaborative approach, having your entire team in a chat session where you're all discussing things as they happen, being very collaborative in the process, but integrating your security into that discussion. The way you can do that is through various bots like QBot, which is a JavaScript-based bot, or Lida, which is a Ruby-based bot. Basically, or maybe I think it's Ruby, but allowing you to automate things like querying your environment, understanding current performance, current network load, what is your CPU doing, how is your disk space looking, but being able to query those in line with a simple command line command within your chat session. Being able to bring in charts and graphs from your graphing tools, being able to bring in log snippets and search log files directly from there, database queries, kind of anything that you can think of that you're kind of working on. So the idea is, you're in the middle of first identifying an attack in progress. Somebody notices that, hey, the CPU load on the system has spiked, or the network has spiked, and something's going on. So let's start the conversation. During the conversation, hey, let me pull a chart from our performance monitoring tools and show what that's looking like. Let's look at log files and see what those are looking like. One of the really big benefits here is that all of this information is, first of all, very easy to gather, as long as you've kind of thought those things through up front, and also is displayed for the entire team to see. So it really brings in kind of that DevOps collaborative and measurement view of the world into kind of your chat stream and into dealing with security issues. So, from a monitoring perspective and measuring perspective, that's a great thing. It helps you kind of to classify the attack, really understand, what's going on, let the whole team know what's going on, and then you can actually respond to it. You can have additional firewall security group rules added. You can, shut down servers. You can, any number of different things that you want to take as a response. So long as you've automated it in advance, you can do directly from there, with the full agreement of your team, that they're all aware of what's going on, and that as a team you can come to agreement that that's the right solution to the problem. One of the really nice things about chat ops in general is that it not only increases collaboration, but it also improves cross-training. Because the chatbots are kind of self-documenting, you're adding scripts to them to go do things. And you include, essentially a quick description of what that thing is. As your script library grows, your documentation kind of increases with it. Now, the details aren't immediately, available there, but if you need to know kind of at a glance what can your chatbot do and kind of what commands are available, those are all there. So if you have a new team member that joins your team, they can start to see not only they can see what the chatbot's capable of, but they can also see how they're used in real life as you go through real life security responses. So that sounds all well and great. It is actually a very helpful thing. We're doing that here at JumpCloud. The big problem, in particular related to security, is authenticating and authorizing those chat users. That's not been a well-solved problem so far. So my sense is that during 2015, we'll see a lot of options for making sure that a chat user is an authorized user for to complete a particular operation. So that's I think that's something that's coming. I think it's something that has to come before this really can be used deeply for security. But I think there's a lot of things you can do, particularly on the monitoring side, that can be safe. It's a great way to get started, and really it's fun because you can go build and automate large parts of your system. You can even integrate other teams into it so that they can look at interesting information about customers and things like that. So that's my quick thoughts on chat ops and how it relates to security. Next slide.
Okay.
So the other trend that I see is, Docker and Lixie containers. Really, for those of you who haven't heard of them, essentially a very, very lightweight virtualized instance that is self-contained, that can be moved across platform, or can be moved across different host instances very easily, that provides you a nearly virtualized environment. So instead of a virtual instance, like a traditional cloud server that has a full copy of its OS, a full, it essentially looks like its own instance. A Docker container generally is designed to run one particular application, and it gets a security isolated environment from other instances that are running on that same host. And so it's not true virtualization, but it looks like it. And Docker combines Lixie containers, which provide that kind of security isolation, with a file system that is very easy to modify and can even be rolled back very easily. So one of the big benefits here, if you look at like the Ghost vulnerability that was so much fun here, what was it, Tuesday? A lot of systems, in particular, I've noticed that systems that rely on the Debian package manager, for whatever reason, seem to take quite a while to patch. So this is, so every one of those systems has to be gone and patched and then rebooted and brought back up. The nice thing about a Docker container is that you can change it much more quickly even than an AMI. And then you can redeploy those containers, very, very quickly and replace your existing infrastructure. So I see that as kind of, the next big thing in DevOps and security is really being able to, say, hey, I've got a Ghost vulnerability. Okay, I'm going to patch my containers. Once my container's patched, then I just redeploy everything, and bam, my entire environment is completely updated. And I realize I ran over time quite a bit, so I'll stop there.
Not a problem at all, James. I first of all, as we were talking about beforehand, I just put Slack, one of the chat ops things, in use here at DevOps.com, and I could tell already how great that is. And I can only imagine how it would help with the security team. But more important, or not more importantly, but just as importantly, the idea of having containerizing your total environment so that when we have to make a security change to a vulnerability or something, and as you say, bam, just rolling it out. I mean, that's stuff we only dreamed of, James, when we started Still Secure back in 2001 and 2002, right? So
for sure.
It's almost otherworldly, or science fiction. Anyway, let's next come up with Tim Matthews from Incapsula, who's going to talk to us probably about one of the biggest scourges I think we face in the performance network world, as well as security, and that's DDoS attacks. Tim, go ahead.
Scourge is definitely the right word. For those that don't know about Incapsula, just to give you a sense of how we get some of this data I'm going to talk about, Incapsula runs a cloud service that accelerates and protects websites. And we look like a giant reverse proxy in the cloud. So we actually see all the traffic coming into the websites of our customers. We protect over 100,000 websites, and we see literally billions of sessions a year. And one of the biggest issues that we're hearing about for our customers is that the size and frequency of DDoS attacks is increasing. Probably everybody on this webinar heard about the alleged or actual DDoS attack against North Korea, probably heard about what Lizard Squad's been up to, heard about the outages at Xbox and Sony, among others. It's just happening more and more frequently, and people who are in the cutting edge of DevOps typically work for some kind of online service, a SaaS company, perhaps an e-commerce company. So protecting the availability of your site against these kinds of attacks is really, really important. And one of the things about the DDoS attack trends is the growth in size, number one, and complexity. And so the old style defenses of provisioning extra bandwidth just won't cut it anymore. Having an extra 10 gigabits of bandwidth sitting around waiting to absorb an attack just isn't feasible. And if you host your application somewhere else, depending on your hosting provider, you might become what we call the noisy neighbor. And if you keep getting attacked, you might actually get kicked off your hosting provider so they can actually provide service to the other people on the shared hosting environment. And so the fact that these attacks are growing in size is a really big issue, and people need to think about a more modern style of defense. The attackers are getting smarter. They are taking over more and more servers with high bandwidth connections. And just lastly on this slide, one misnomer I'd like to correct is these are not attacks that are being mounted with botnets of home PCs. These are typically attacks of botnets of compromised servers. So why is that? Servers have really good bandwidth connections, and the attackers are looking to take over servers, maybe even yours, so they can actually mount very efficient, high-volume DDoS attacks against companies like you. That's my first trend. We do this reporting every year based on actual data from our network, so we're not just making this up. And if you want, you can actually see our bot report with all the details. Let me share one more trend with you on the next slide regarding bots. Probably everyone here knows what bots are. Everyone here probably knows about the Google bot, which is the good kind of bot. Unfortunately, there are also a lot of bad bots. And every year we also do a survey of, I shouldn't say survey, a study about the traffic that we see in our network. And we're actually reverse proxies. We're breaking open all of the packets that are coming in, and we're seeing who's actually visiting websites. And probably the most alarming trend, if you look at the type of bad bots we see, is the increase in the number of impersonators. So what are impersonators? Impersonators are bots that are trying as much as possible to look like humans, in some cases trying to look like the Google bot. So they can get easy access or privileged access to your systems, and they're trying to plant some kind of malware or backdoor on your servers, which can communicate back to a command and control system. And you should all be aware of what kind of traffic is coming to your site, what kind of bots are coming to your site, and what kind of bots they are. Are they scraping content, which is not a great thing, but a lot of e-commerce sites or travel sites care about this. The comment spammers are kind of annoying, but you really want to look out for impersonator bots looking to do some kind of activation of an exploit, planting of a backdoor in your servers. And everyone that works in DevOps should have some strategy to have a web application firewall of some kind on their servers that can intercept this malicious traffic to their servers so they don't get compromised. So Alan, back to you.
Okay, Tim, I don't know how many of our audience are actually security people versus DevOps or ops or devs, but just so to bring it home, those DDoS attacks are typically what we see used, for instance, against the games, Sony's PlayStation and the Xbox network right around on Christmas Day. As you mentioned, it was used in the alleged attack. I don't think it was an alleged attack. There was an attack on North Korea. It was just alleged by who did it.
Right, you're right.
And many others. DDoS is it's a tough one, and it's probably the favorite tool of the hacktivists as well, like Anonymous and some of the other groups. Because it's a crowdsourced attack in some ways, right?
That's right. It's a crowdsourced attack. Site availability gets picked up in the press, and so it's a perfect tool for the hacktivists.
Absolutely. But here's Tim, and we could talk more about this later. My premise on this, though, is that DDoS isn't a security problem necessarily by it. Certainly not only a security problem. It is, somewhat, but it's a performance issue. And for our DevOps folks out there who are concerned about network performance, DDoS and security in general has to enter that conversation. But we'll talk more about that later. Next, I want to turn things over to Stephen Cody. Actually, we just grabbed, my fault, I should have put this out. There was some good data there. But let me turn things over now to Stephen Cody, who's going to talk to us about cloud security, clouds, and some excellent stuff. Stephen, you would like to take over?
Thanks, Alan. So we talk about preventing attacks. It really starts from the foundation of building a system in general. So it starts off with just the hardware. I mean, looking at just the hardened systems. These are things, when I was doing desktop support 20 some odd years ago, we had our golden image, right? You had your standard image, and that image is what you deployed to every single box. And you made sure that image was hardened, you made sure it was up to date on patching levels, but then they got out of date, so then you started versioning. So, I mean, this is a great example of how, we really need to start doing that, how we need to start applying standards and systems that can be imaged, and using kind of that golden standard, that golden image during development process and automated deployments, using tools that enable creating machines, things like Packers. Designing systems so that executable code is cleanly separated from the data and the file system level. Implement proper permission strategies for all your file systems. I'm an old networking guy, so I'm a big believer of least privilege, so least permissions, including like read-only, no exec, no SUID, mount options. You got to incorporate security. You got to look at, like, SANS has a great Linux security checklist, or a CIS benchmark. Use resources like this to build that golden-based image and to form a foundation for your deployments. This really provides clear, definitive answers on how you can easily ensure security on all your systems. Adding things on top of that, like file integrity management solutions, because if there's something we can take away from some of the breaches that we've learned this year, is you need to really start monitoring the files and the services that are running on these implementations. Create a whitelist of these are the only services that are allowed on here. So anything outside of that, you get alerted to. It's a great way, and by standardizing your systems is the way to do this. Leverage configuration management. To ensure that all software and configuration changes are standardized. Make sure they're repeatable. When you're implementing patches, you need to have a solid test environment. Make sure that you can go ahead and test these patches, because inadvertently, sometimes these patches will break applications on our systems. So we got to have that testing environment. By following these guidelines, this will ensure that your infrastructures are built to be immutable. It will enable maximum leverage out of your security and compliance hardening efforts, and you'll be able to set up a good alerting process on whenever there's any type of modifications from the base system. Now, talking about the base system alone, we have to now get into the software side of this. Next slide, please. So with this continuous delivery pattern, it basically is a way to deliver software quickly to release. And, that's kind of the whole DevOps discussion really came out of the separations between, development, the operations staff, requirements gathering. And that really bakes us back down, before we get into this, into the foundation of a software development lifecycle. And there are several steps as part of this lifecycle. One being kind of that initiation, beginning with that first idea, the concept, the proposal, what did you create, which defines, the next step, which is like defining concept development, defining the scope of the boundaries, the concepts, including system boundaries, documentation, cost benefits, risk management. Then you go into planning, development ops, a project management plan, other planning documentation, requirements analysis. This is where, I've always seen a lot of projects fall, is because don't spend enough time doing requirements. We spent gathering requirements kind of in a vacuum in a development or an operations environment separately. Now together, you get the full requirements, not only on how it should be built efficiently, but on how all the features will meet the needs of the business. So requirements, this requirements phase is absolutely the most important. Then design, transforming those detailed requirements into actual complete systems, design documents. Then you go into development. And that's where we get into this continuous pattern, grabbing, requirements from IT and business and having your commit stage where you start rolling out code. You have automated acceptance testing, then you go to capacity testing, manual testing, then you go to compliance certification. Now, during this development, integration, and testing phase, there's one thing that's missing here is really the injection of security. Having security as one of the checkpoints at every step along the way. As you gather your requirements, are those requirements secure? As you're designing, is this a secure pattern? As you're developing, getting those scanners and starting to run that against your code, running your code through scanners, having penetration testing done, making sure that you have minimum ports, that has to all to be done through that development, integration, and testing phase, because if it's not, then you're bolting on security after the fact, which is going to be a lot more expensive, and it's going to create a lot more heartache for the organization. So having this continuous delivery pattern is so key, but you got to inject security along this way. And then as far as implementation, because then you have implementation of the product, then you have operations and maintenance, then kind of that disposition, which describes the end system activities, what it should be doing, proper preparation of data, how is it being presented. So it's always constant that operation and maintenance, this continuous delivery pattern, are key, one and the same, as they continually are evolving, upgrading your software to the latest, greatest versions, adding the features that your customers are requesting. But you got to make sure that you're injecting security at every point along the way. I can't stress that enough. Next slide, please. And with this slide, it really talks about, two separations. You have kind of your auditing, your compliance, disaster recovery, but then you have, your end-to-end visibility, your continuous detection, protection, automated configuration and scaling. But the remediation and fast resolution is kind of that incident response plan that you're going to be looking at, and having continuous security going back and forth throughout the development of that life cycle that we just talked about. For example, as you're going through the design phase, you're going to want a security guy looking at that design. Well, do we really need these ports open? Do we really need to, write the code in this fashion because it's a little noisy? Can we, trim it down a little bit? Go through the development phase, go through the testing. As developers are continually putting out the code, you have to have security tools. You have security personnel that are constantly testing that code, especially if you're having a rapid development process like something like Agile, where you're going through and just constantly rolling out. The security posture is one of the most important things, because once you roll out code, it's out there. Once you go to production, it's out there, and it's available for people to scan, probe, kind of poke at it, try to find those holes, find those vulnerabilities. So baking security in from the beginning of the process and having it go through and continually always evolve as the software and applications continue to evolve is absolutely key in having a secure development environment. But not only that, but having a successful DevOps plan. So with that, thank you very much, and Alan, I'll hand it to you.
Hey, Tim, that was great. Attendees, and there's a bunch of you out here, if anyone has any questions, please put it in either the chat area or the questions area, and I'll try to bring them up. But we have some stuff already, but Stephen, I really wanted to home in a little bit on this theme of continuous security. In DevOps, we have the themes of continuous delivery and continuous integration, feedback loops. There's always this continuous loop, if you will, of doing things. Right. And the idea of making security continuous, I mean, to a lot of people, I bet you that's almost radical, right? Because security is, even, that was one of the knocks against PCI for so many years. Security was so much a point-in-time type of practice. And I'm wondering, I know, Stephen, you deal a bunch with cloud security folks, people who are putting their infrastructure in the cloud. How is this continuous security sort of life cycle, if you will, playing out with them?
It's a constant challenge. I mean, it really depends on the size of the business, because there's some small, medium-sized businesses that it's hard for them to be able to have this development life cycle. They're relying on outside companies. But with mature more small, medium, large size, enterprise size businesses, I mean, it's really been a transformation over the last 20 years that I've been in technology because, back in the 80s, it was, they didn't have interconnected machines out to the internet, so, code wasn't looked at having to be secure. It just had to be efficient and it had to run, quickly and meet the customer demands. But security wasn't really a concept back then when building code. Where, we fast forward 20 years later, these apps we're building are being on the public internet. They have interconnected machines. They have people that constantly are accessing from not only inside but outside of an organization. So security has to constantly be developed and baked in at the base, because I've seen too many projects where you've rolled out a great efficient application, but as soon as it gets out there, boom, somebody takes it over and it's compromised because inadvertently there was some backdoor. Because developers are great at optimizing code, writing code, but they're not always security people. So they're not always thinking about that backdoor. How would I break into this? How would I exploit this code? But now bringing those DevOps and teams together and having that continuous security development throughout the whole phase of the software development lifecycle, you're having security injected every point along the way. So instead of bolting it on the end, which is going to be costly, it's being built into the product as it's growing, as it's maturing, as it keeps getting updated throughout the years. You have a security, constantly injected, and it's really, really important. And seeing that landscape change over the last 20 years, has been very, very interesting.
Sure. You know what, James and Tim, both of you are not newbies either. What's your view of how this has changed? I think both of you probably have 20 plus years in the business as well. What's your views of how it's changed? James, let's first go to you.
So the thing that always kind of surprises me is that the security and DevOps, everybody talks about that they absolutely should be they should be working together. It should be continuous. It should be injected into the process. I haven't found a lot on the topic of how to inject. I think, Stephen, you made some great examples of kind of how that should look in terms of reviewing and verifying and things like that. But there's really not that much out there. I think, in my experience, a lot of people are kind of trying to figure it out for themselves. And preparing for this, I did a little bit of research around that, trying to find some things, and wasn't very successful. So I think that's kind of the next big step, is kind of what are the best practices in doing that. Let's get those enumerated and try to put some kind of framework around it so that people know kind of what does it mean to inject security at each stage. I think that's kind of the next conversation to have there.
Yep. Tim, what about you?
Yeah, I was just smiling just now thinking about a new webinar that I could put on called the Agile Auditor, because one of the things
we can do that.
Yeah, one of the things that struck me about your question is the old practice of annual audits for IT infrastructure, just impossible to do. And so I bring that up just because the whole mindset and practices around security and compliance is going to have to change. Security is going to have to keep up with the pace of development. And I think James is right. There really isn't. I mean, there are. Rich Mogul probably is among the guys who is talking the most about this and thinking about it. But in terms of widespread best practices and courses for security and DevOps people, it's probably an area that really needs to get fleshed out, because you've got to figure out a way to make security part of the methodology of DevOps. And I think I think people know that they should do it, diet and exercise, but people aren't doing it.
Yeah, no, unfortunately not. And guys, let me take some questions from the audience, because otherwise we'll wind up sitting and talking about this all day. Someone asked, are there any software security testing tools that you recommend? Great question. James, I know you as a developer, James, from 20 years ago, so I know you'll have some answers here. What do you recommend?
Oh boy, the thing that I'm probably most familiar with is Veracode. really, very deep analysis of software. I haven't really looked kind of broadly at the market. That's the one that I've really looked at. Great tool, really solid at identifying potential vulnerabilities and providing a workflow to allow you to really identify and track the resolution of issues. That's a key piece of it. I mean, it's great that you can go do an analysis of your code and get a list of things that need to be fixed. One of the nice things that Veracode does is gives you that workflow so that you can say, okay, yes, either we're going to fix this one and it's going to get fixed right away, it's getting prioritized at the kind of the top of the development queue, or this is something we're going to ignore because we have other mitigations, or it's not really a vulnerability, that type of thing. So that's the one I'm most familiar with. Others may have some other thoughts on it.
So, Stephen, you're out talking to people, all the time. What do you hear people using?
I hear Veracode a lot as well, but there's Source Patrol, Insight, there's Sentinel, but there's also a lot of open source free tools for some of the smaller environments where you can go to places like the OWASP. OWASP has a great index of source code analysis tools that you can go look at, which list everything open source, everything commercial, and it really comes down to your environment and your coding practice, and finding the right tool that's going to match that. So great resource. OWASP is a fantastic resource to find just a list of tools to try out in your environment.
Tim, anything to add on that one?
Yeah, the only thing I'd add is, in addition to the code scanning tools that were mentioned, people should find a site scanning application. There are a number out there in the market, so that you can actually look from the outside in, so to speak, at your application and vulnerabilities that may not have been picked up in the QA process.
Let me add one. I've spent a little time in security, so I want to give a shout out to my friend Josh Corman at Sonatype. So for you guys who may not realize, I mean, so many of us, so many of the folks doing dev today, how many are writing code from scratch versus cobbling together components, if you will, and then gluing them together, for lack of a better word. And so many of us use open source components for some of the basic functionalities of our applications and then build on top of that. And what Sonatype's really built is sort of a repository or a library of all of these open source components, as well as testing them and noting what vulnerabilities, securities, and stuff they have. So, and I'm not 100% sure on the model. It's Wayne Jackson's the CEO there, who is the CEO of SourceFire. But Sonatype, if you're doing development and especially if you're components, using components to put together your apps, a Sonatype type of repository is probably not a bad place to look.
Hey, Alan, one other thing.
Sure.
You got to look at more than just the code scanners now. I think about some more. You got to also start looking at things like Nessus, Metasploit, things where you can actually start testing, exploits, active exploits against your code and see what happens. So the code scanners are one piece of it, but there's also the networking and also just the exploit part of it.
Absolutely. All right, let me get to this next question. I'm having a hard time reading it. Being able to fully interact with a very rapid development process is going to put a heavy burden on underfunded, we're always underfunded, aren't we, InfoSec groups. How are you initiating the conversations with senior management to obtain the extra resources? What's the panel's experience? Do the development and operational budgets keep pace with the increased security requirements?
Wow.
So this is Tim, if you don't mind. It's a problem, and this is going to sound like I'm joking, but there's nothing like a good breach or DDoS takedown to get the attention of the board. And doesn't mean on your company only. It's in, like, the Sony hack was in Variety, a Hollywood publication. So it's out there. People are reading about it at the executive level. So that's one way to get people's attention. Absolutely.
James, you may remember this, but there was a time early on I I looked into just how criminal it would be just to do a breach. Don't do anything, but just to get their attention. But all kidding aside, there's no better religious zealot than someone who has had a near-death experience or anything, something like that. So yes, that is. But unfortunately, there's that zebra herd mentality where there's thousands of zebras in the herd, and the lion's going to eat someone else today. Because why would he want to eat little old me? And we can't wait. It's going to happen to Sony, but it won't happen to me. It's going to happen to Xbox. It won't happen to me. It's going to happen to Target, but I'm just a little mom and pop. And so there is that. But I do feel, and this is what gets me excited about DevOps, I do feel that with DevOps, there's actually the chance to kind of change that. Because that's security that I grew up in. You either sold FUD, or you waited, hope for something bad to happen, and then they would come calling. But I think we need a better way. We need to talk. We need to talk to businesses, to talk to the executive management team in their own language, and we need to talk about risk. And Stephen, Alert Logic's built a great business around that very proposition. Do you want to chime in on that?
Yeah, absolutely. It really makes me think, because I've been both in the networking and security worlds, trying to get the budget throughout my career. And when I was doing networking, it was easy, right? I throttled back the bandwidth on the executive floor to half of what it was supposed to be. And when they came to me and said, "Hey, our internet's running really slow. What's going on?" Well, I submitted a budget for new equipment so we can get faster equipment, and surprisingly, every year my budget got approved. But with security, as Tim mentioned earlier, outside of a breach, trying to get teams to build, invest in security is challenging. I've always traditionally used compliance as my bet. Using whatever compliance the business size that had to comply to, is what I would use to say, hey, I need the security function because this compliance regulation requires it. But that always allowed me to build like a great cybersecurity team that could do like education, scanning, manage antivirus, things like that. But once I got into like 24/7 operations, things that weren't mandated by compliance, it became very difficult to get budgets. And that's where, getting information out there about breaches is really important, staying informed about what's going on in the industry. Because if I can go to my boss and say, hey, our competitor just got hit with this, or, hey, our partners just got hit with this, we may want to watch out. That helps further your case a lot slower than an actual breach will, but it does help further your case.
Absolutely.
That's a great point. That actually, I'm sorry if I can jump in real quick, that actually kind of suggests kind of another way to look at it is looking at your security as a competitive advantage, right? And saying, look, I've been certified, I've got these audits, my competitors don't. Who are you going to trust, right? Make it a winning solution, a revenue generating solution as much as possible. That doesn't always work. It doesn't work in all industries, but for security sensitive customers, that's definitely one that can help.
Yeah, Dave, if I could just add in, this is Tim. We actually we're out here at our sales kickoff event. We were lucky enough to have the CISO from Cerner come talk to us, and he said that very same thing, that especially being in the healthcare industry, selling to hospitals and their patients, that they are now using security as a competitive advantage because of all the awareness among the customers of the potential issues with breaches.
Sure. The same person who asked the question had finished off with, how can DevOps help to overcome shortages resulting from insufficient budgets? And, this is a question that I've dealt with on panels before and in discussions with people. And I'm going to throw something out there, and I'll ask the panelists to comment on it, and that is this. DevOps, in many ways, is security's last best hope. Because frankly, for all of the money we've spent on security and all of the budgets and all of the shiny new trinkets and magic bullets, James or Tim, you guys may know, I think security is, what, an $80 billion industry now, or some outrageous number. And yet we get more breaches every year than the year before. what can we do to fundamentally change the equation? I think that's what executives want to hear. I think executives are tired of security bros saying, hey, there's a shiny new bullet that just came out and we can get this new vaccine and we can, you know, and then it doesn't work. I think they want to fundamentally change the equation. And I think things like this concept of continuous security, the concept of immutable infrastructure, the concept of let's building security into the development process rather than bolting it on after we deploy it in operations are concepts that make sense to executives, that are concepts that they'd be willing to invest, you know, what's the saying, a penny before versus a dollars after. I forget the idiom, but you know, I think DevOps does represent an opportunity for us to change that equation and maybe reallocate budget, right? Maybe, you know, with DevOps we iterate, we learn, you know, it's not perfect, we make it better over time. And maybe that's part of it. We learn from a DDoS breach and figure out how to prevent the next one. And it's a different conversation than what we've had in the past. Stephen, what do you think about that?
You know, the conversation has to go on, and it has to be very frank, and that's kind of the key. It's like, you know, you use that mention, or you've included in as a sub point, but it really has to just, you know, you need the security products, you need the secure environments. It is a competitive advantage. You know, we've seen a lot of effects in the retail industry with customer confidence. You know, it really is becoming a differentiator, and the more you invest on it, the more secure you're going to be. But you have to invest wisely. I'm not saying just go out and blow your money on any technology piece. You really got to find a partnership, because you're not going to find just one magic bullet, one vendor that's going to do it all for you. It really is a partnership of yourself and your managed security providers that come together and build the right solution.
Absolutely, absolutely. Guys, you know what? And someone, Joseph from the audience, it was an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, and that's the saying I was trying to remember. Anyway, we've got a question from our Twitter audience, and that is, how can DevOps? Oh, actually, this was just a comment on what we were saying about overcoming insufficient budgets. You know, I've never, I don't think that problem, by the way, ever goes away. I think insufficient budgets, you know, as part of my writing and everything, I get briefed by a lot of security companies, and I hear so many of them saying, oh, it's the developers who have the budget, and if we can show how our security tool is valuable to developers, we'll be able to break into that stash and get to that budget. Or it's those ops and network guys who have the budget, and if we can make our security tool, you know, more friendly to them, we can break into their stash and get the budget. But I don't know if those are truly the answers. I think you've got to show why what you're doing makes sense financially to your organization, and that's the key to unlocking budgets. Anyway, we're coming to the top of the hour shortly here, and I wanted to start wrapping things up a little bit. Let me pose this question to the panels. I think there's a dual part of it. Can security, right? With DevOps, we try to do more faster, but is it possible to build more software faster and more securely? And I think that's the question that'll unlock budgets. And let me put that, James, I know you've had both development, security, operational management experience. Is that just ridiculous to assume that we can build software faster, better, and more secure?
No, I think that's very possible. And I think, so DevOps, in my mind, is about providing leverage. You know, the whole idea of, hey, let's automate things that we've done manually in the past, right, is one of the main tenets of DevOps. That anytime you automate something that you've had to do more than once in the past, you're gaining leverage, right? So your security budget goes further and further the more you can automate. And the combination of DevOps with SaaS-based services, and being able to offload some of that work to a secure environment, so that you're, as a security expert, you're not saying, hey, I have to secure my directory in the case of JumpCloud, for example, or hey, I'm not having to worry about building up DDoS protection in the case of Incapsula, or hey, I'm not worried about my intrusion detection in the case of Alert Logic. All of those things gain you leverage, right? They're automating what used to be a manual process, and so I think that is a great way to combine DevOps and offloading some of that responsibility for your security in a secure way to providers that that do that daily as their bread and butter. I think that's where kind of those two things give you that big leverage.
Fantastic. Stephen, to you, is it possible to build software that fast and more secure?
Absolutely. I mean, I think, we've had the budget issue talks but it absolutely is. I mean, baking in security as part of your software development lifecycle, again, is very key. Can't stress it enough. You really have to build that into the project plans. I mean, security should be a check mark on every project, even outside of just ops and dev, every project that goes out there, security should be a check mark for. And that's the change that we're really seeing. And with the DevOps deployment model, I mean, continuous deployment is really how, some companies have a competitive advantage. The first one with the feature wins, right? And so, with that fast, agile, development process, you really need to have, security baked in from the core. It really has to be, because one mistake in a fast development process like that, and, it could be a reputation of the company, it could be an outage, could be an attack, you never know. So you always got to take those proper precautions.
Excellent. Tim, Incapsula sponsored the webinar today. Thank you very much. I'm going to give you the last word. Is it possible? Can we build software better, faster, and more secure?
I think we can. We do it ourselves here. We've got a DevOps team to run our worldwide network, and it occurred to me that, having been in security for a long time, we should maybe move away from this whole defense in depth, surround the company with security, and think about the advantage of having a security developer who's pushing out, improvements in security every week. And instead of thinking about what the other guys are going to break, maybe we should just start thinking about how can we add a new security feature, strong authentication 1 week, some form of, detecting malware or fraud the next week. Small incremental features that might actually be an improvement over how we do things today.
Excellent. Guys, we've got 1 minute, just real quickly. James Brown, if they want to find out more about what you're doing and JumpCloud is doing, where can they go? On the web or Twitter or anywhere?
JumpCloud.com is probably the best place to start.
Stephen, what about you and Alert Logic?
AlertLogic.com, and you can follow our blogs there, and I'm at Stephen Cody at Twitter.
Excellent. And Tim, what about Incapsula?
Yeah, I would follow us on Twitter, so it's at Incapsula_com. You can see all of our latest research and blogs there.
Fantastic. And folks in the audience, thank you very much for attending. If security and DevOps, the intersection of security and DevOps is of interest to you, I would just remind you all that DevOps.com is sponsoring, or actually producing, DevOps Connect, SecDevOps at RSA Conference, the Monday of RSA Week at the Moscone Center. RSA Conference themselves is sponsoring it for us. And Gene Kim, Josh Corman will be keynoting. It's going to be great. Call for papers is open now. So if you have something to write about Stephen Cody like continuous security, perhaps you want to get that submission in now and find out more. It'll be a great day of learning about security and DevOps. This is Alan Schimmel for DevOps.com. Thanks to our panelists, James Brown, Stephen Cody, and Tim. Tim, I'm blanking on your name. I apologize. Tim Matthews of Incapsula. And thank you all for listening in today. The slides and the recording of this will be available within the next 24